I found this game, Corporate America.
Corporate America. That's the Xander game. What is it?
It's by some guy. I found he's a local game designer in Oakland, and I found another local game shop in Temescal. And it's a game about basically how you can just take over the government with corporations, and it's fucking incredible.
Let's go.
We have like 4 to 6 really, really loud and obnoxious friends who are really excited about how America and politics is not working. You should check the game out. Welcome to the Games Growth Update, your weekly top news, trends, and insights for the games growth industry, researched and brought to you by Upptic. Learn how our team and technology help drive millions of players to the world's best games at Upptic.com. Cool. Well, we got a lot to cover this week. Some interesting articles, topics.
We do. News. Lots of news.
Lots of news. Lots of news you won't cover that's important because we don't have anything interesting to say about it as well.
Yeah, I think that's, as we're, kind of refocusing on the news, that, we talk a lot about some of the big stories in tech. You don't need like the fifth take on OpenAI, Sam Altman leaving, come back. But I think for a lot of these things going on, we're going to just try to see, like, is there an angle here? Is there a story for those of us working at the nexus of games and growth marketing? And I think we've got some interesting ones today.
Yeah.
Where should we start, Xander?
Well, let's start with the one that's the most over-covered topic, Elon and advertisers. Do you want to give the highlights here?
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone heard about this, but there's this guy. His name's Elon Musk. He has a few companies. One of them is called X, formerly known as Twitter. Anyway, so yeah, I think this has been like highly overreported, but yesterday Elon talked at the New York Times Deal Book Conference, and the topic of brand advertisers leaving Twitter came up. And Elon, in so many words, basically clearly and repeatedly said, if brand advertisers are going to try to quote unquote blackmail me by pulling money, they can go fuck themselves. And he called out Bob Iger of Disney relatively explicitly by name during this. I'm sure Linda Yaccarino was wincing wherever she was watching from. So everyone's heard this story. The interview is very viral. But what I don't see people talking about, and the first place my head went to, is what does this mean for those of us that are doing data-driven marketing, that are not brand advertisers, that are in the game of arbitraging eCPM into revenue from games and other products? So I want to dig into that. I mean, Xander, I have a lot I want to share, but like, did you see the interview? Any high-level thoughts before we get into the practical implications for marketers?
I saw the snippets. I need to watch the whole thing. I'm reticent to talk about it before I consume all of it, just because people have so many takes on Elon. I hate having the mob take. I might prefer to form my own opinion, but I've seen the viral pieces.
Yeah, the world does not need more Elon Musk hot takes. So
no.
So yeah, I tweeted immediately after saying that, thanking Elon for the Cyber Week sale of 90% off CPMs on Twitter. So what do I mean, and why am I thinking about this? So we're in the most expensive time of the year for marketers with Q4, because the default is a lot of products do their heaviest marketing in November, December, Christmas season is when the bulk of consumer spending happens. And so commensurate with that, it's when the cost of advertising inventory shoots up. As performance marketers, and like one of Upptic's go-to strategies is we often actually pull back in advertising in late November, in December, because games are a pretty evergreen product. And we typically find if we just kind of wait a little bit, spend that dollar in January, we're often getting about 2x the bang for our buck, because like the day after Christmas, some people know this, but bit of industry secret, literally like Christmas day after Christmas, a ton of advertising stops because it was all lead up to Christmas. So anyway, why am I going into the weeds about this? Twitter is one of the channels that has historically been very heavy on brand advertising, right, and low on performance marketing spend. These are the channels that are traditionally the most highest impacted and increased cost of advertising going into this holiday season. We have seen something kind of counterintuitive. Like historically, like Twitter or X has been kind of trash for performance marketing. And one reason that it has been historically is I think the eCPMs have been really jacked up by awareness, brand style marketing. A nice side benefit if you set your opinions on Elon and his management of X aside for a moment, is he's done multiple things to offend brand advertisers that have left the X ecosystem. And this is another bit of alpha from Upptic's day-to-day of marketing. We're actually seeing like Twitter is surprisingly returning as a valid performance marketing channel for some of the games that we're doing marketing for. So tip from us. And it's a little funny to just see the relationship between what is bad for brand advertisers that are more focused on the association, what content might their ads be showing up next to, etc. Some of the kind of perception around their advertising is inversely a plus for those of us in the performance marketing space. So everyone can make their own judgments about how they feel on advertising on X right now, but just something we wanted to call out. It's like, hey, when the top bidders and biggest buyers on a large advertising platform pull out, the cost of inventory, cost of bidding on that inventory goes down immensely. So this is, I think, the interesting kind of uptick angle on Elon telling brand advertisers to fuck themselves, and our maybe a recommendation of something to check out this holiday season if you're trying to find a channel that is not oversaturated with the cost of marketing going up. Xander, any thoughts here? Do you agree on my take? We haven't tested this yet because this just happened yesterday, but we are, exploring like going a little heavier into Twitter while there's the blowback from this.
Yeah. Well, so whenever there's a topic we cover, I want to make sure that we have some unique perspective. And so one of the first things I did was I reached out to one of our growth leads who works on across the portfolio to ask him, how is Twitter doing for advertising these days? He said, it's decent if you segment it right on iOS in US. We can spend about, low 4 figures a day for, a large casual game. And the performance is really good. It's like, oh, well, I used to work on that portfolio. We never got Twitter to work. And so that actually shows that like, okay, there's a pulse here where there wasn't before. If that was the last month, that means that maybe this is a channel that scales going into the new year, which, that's kind of exciting for us. It's our whole job is to find new channels. And if we have one, great. Now, I think I am less offended than the average person, so I have no problem advertising on Twitter/X, but each brand has to make that decision themselves, like you said. It's interesting though. Maybe there's some opportunity here.
Yeah, I would not want Linda's job. I think she's probably like the exact right person for this job because you need that counterweight to Elon constantly offending anyone, of someone who knows how to coddle and sweet talk those large brand advertisers. But she's got her work cut out for her.
I'm so curious to see what's going to happen with her career. It's either the smartest or stupidest career decision anyone can ever make.
We'll see.
Speaking of stupid career decisions, like the transition, let's jump to someone who you might have heard of if you followed the Web3 industry fairly closely, which is the Binance CEO, CZ, who may or may not be going to jail. We'll see. So just, again, a really, really popular story if you haven't been following this closely. Binance CEO is stepping down. And Binance, for those who don't know, it's the biggest cryptocurrency exchange in the world. Binance CEO, CZ, I'm not going to try and pronounce his name, is stepping down after pleading guilty for breaking U.S. anti-money laundering laws. And the company is agreeing to a $4.5 billion settlement, with CZ personally paying $50 million, which is one of the largest corporate penalties in history. There's a bunch of stuff that they did that's sort of illegal. One of the top was that they have over 100K suspicious transactions with terrorist groups and child abuse sites.
100K as far as like number of transactions or
suspicious transactions.
So not $100,000, 100,000 transactions.
Yeah, which is a lot of transactions. And if you listen to him talk about it, he basically at the time was he sort of like rolled out the Silicon Valley playbook, which is like ask for permission or forgiveness on permission. We're just going to do whatever we can to drive market share and we'll sort it out with regulators later. And so it's pretty interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, he seemed very, very somber in court. He's like, I'm not used to being in these type of situations. I'm here to do what's right. And they're saying he's going to get maybe 18 months, which considering he's literally like funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas, they were literally using that to clear their money on Binance. It seems like a pretty light penalty overall. They did 4.5 billion. They fined 4.5 billion, but for some context, they did hundreds of trillions of dollars of transactions of cryptocurrency over the previous year. Or sorry, I don't know if it's hundreds of trillions, but in the range of 11 figures to sound right. So it's a pretty crazy story. I'm curious what you think about how this is playing out overall. And then also, does it matter to us? Does it matter to Web3 games?
Yeah, so similar to the Elon story, I think there's a reason that I wanted us to cover that this week. I mean, first, maybe just a little more context. Yeah, CZ, I think his full name is pronounced Changpeng Zhao. He is assumed by most to be one of the wealthiest people in the world. We don't actually know his official net worth, but a lot of people have estimated based on putting some data points together that he's likely one of the world's wealthiest people. So, a few times in conversations recently, I've been talking about we're in the burn the sage era of crypto and Web3 right now, which is the last bull market had a lot of greed, had a lot of bad actors. One by one, most of those have been identified, brought to trial, and many now imprisoned or on their way there. And what we're seeing kind of in the trenches with a lot of the teams that we're working with that are still building in Web3, especially coming out of the bear market, there's kind of like healthier bones on this new crop that we're seeing. The illest actors were brought down, and people who continued building like in this bear market usually did it because they had a non-short-term financial incentive that was their primary motivator. So how does this tie to CZ? CZ was the largest remaining controversial figurehead from this last cycle and before. I think his story is a little different, though, for a few reasons. Firstly, he turned himself in here. And I don't think this is the last that we've heard of him. This is a drop in the bucket of his total fortune, what this penalty is. And I think he's a very calculated person. I was in the background, Xander, I was pulling up a D&D alignment chart to try to, for myself, mentally put like where I put CZ on this. And I would say this is kind of like, he's viewed, for D&D alignment, I would put actually CZ as true neutral.
Yeah.
So perhaps. But I think whereas some of these other ill actors we saw acting with a lot of like outright ill intent or knowing bad actions, I think most of CZ's actions, and I don't know the dude, it seems like more like intentionally turning a blind eye to things. And he's not hated and despised in light of the things that he's known to have done in the same manner that a SBF or someone is. Sure. But he's also not universally loved by any means, but definitely controversial and definitely did some things that he needs to go to jail for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think like with him getting out, it's sort of the last of the quote unquote like main characters of the controversial figures from the last cycle. And again, in kind of this theme of like, it feels like we're starting a new cycle, as we talked about in the most recent podcast with crypto and with Web3. And we're starting with a bit of the clean slate and a lot of the big power players that were doing questionable things out, which I think is setting up the market for a little better conditions. Now, will there be a new class of greedy ass people? Almost certainly. But it's a more mature segment. I think that's kind of what this is all boiling down to. As some of the noise and greed gets worked out, it is feeling this year, especially as we close out the year, like the segment has matured a bit. What are your thoughts, Xander?
I mean, I think largely I agree. I think in this specific case, we have to really acknowledge that this is a largely symbolic move. He stepped down as the CEO, but he's still by far the largest shareholder and majority shareholder of Binance. The fees that they're getting it's crazy to say 4.3 billion is nominal, but it is nominal in the context of how much money the company is worth and is making. And I mean, 18 months of jail time, while I am happy, I hope he gets at least that much. It's really a slap on the wrist relative to the immense wealth creation that he has undertaken over the last decade. So, I guess respect. He understands how to play the government. And I think your point is that he's very calculated in a way that someone as young and fast and loose as SBF was, CZ is not. And so, I mean, good for him. One of the other interesting things here is like the crypto market seems to have largely shrugged this off. Even transaction volumes on Binance are like up during this period, which I think if anything, it's like, remember when Facebook settled that case a few years ago for billions of dollars, the stock went up. And I think that's basically the same thing here is like investors and folks who are using these platforms basically see this as a net positive, assuming that it works through and they make it out the other side.
Well, is it so much that it's a net positive or just the removal of uncertainty?
That's what I mean. It's
just like
risk. Yeah. Important to be precise to the language. Yeah, I mean, it's de-risked in a way that it wasn't before, or it will be de-risked as this works its way through the system.
Yeah, makes sense. So I don't think there's a ton that we want to dig into about the story. It's been covered a lot elsewhere, but I do think there's implications. A lot of the gaming ecosystem is funded by Binance in some capacity. Their own chain, BNB chain, has a lot of gaming projects on it. I do think that there's going to be trickle-down effects that are already in progress from this, and it will have impact on our sector of games and games marketing. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about, I put this as sort of like the cap on this, the final note on this last era of the cycle. And it really does feel like, okay, now we're turning the page and I'm going to learn how this next cycle pans out.
One other interesting and maybe poorly formed metaphor is it reminds me a little bit of Microsoft and the antitrust, in the early 2000s, where it's like, you asked about Gates, like, what was this case about? It had nothing to do with the antitrust. It had to do with, paying homage to Washington. And it seems a little bit like this is similar in that regard, where it's like, these people are taking, going to Washington, paying homage, letting them get their pound of flesh. And moving forward, I think we'll see crypto continue to become more and more important in mainstream. And look no further than BlackRock, who's starting a Bitcoin ETF. I mean, one of the biggest companies in the world. And if they're doing a Bitcoin ETF so that really large investors can invest in Bitcoin, I mean, this is only going in one direction, at least for the medium term.
You bring up a good point, Xander, which is the evolving relationship between crypto companies and government. So I think what the US government is trying to demonstrate here is confess your sins, work with us, and you will be allowed to survive and exist in some capacity. But if you insist on going your own way, breaking the rules and not working with us, we'll destroy you. So we're at least setting a precedent of, if these crypto companies kiss the ring, confess their sins, that they'll be allowed to continue to exist in some format.
Yeah, agreed.
What's next?
Cool. This last one came a little bit out of nowhere, at least to me. And it was that ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, plans to wind down the new game brand and exit the video game industry for insiders, which, I mean, that is a shocking development. The decision comes after a strategic review, prompting a restructuring in the game division, then provide a bunch of specific details. But they will be working on halting unreleased games and exploring options to divest from their existing titles, which could potentially impact hundreds of employees. It won't affect some of their divisions. For instance, the Uyo casual game brand, which I don't really know anything about, which is featured in Douyin, which is a TikTok counterpart in China, and also won't affect any casual games integrated into TikTok. So to me, this was a huge surprise. And I was trying to understand what was going on here. And it's not a publicly traded company, and so there's not a ton of information. It's all sort of hearsay. So we're just going off.
And I think that's kind of important. So just for reference, I mean, I think we're referencing a couple of articles here, one by The Verge and some information from Reuters. Reuters typically has a good track record of factual information, but we do want to give the disclaimer that this is like a pretty breaking story. Yeah. And we're still really light on statements directly from Nuverse and ByteDance. So, we're right now reporting on what the rumors and what the leaks are.
Right. That's important to acknowledge. I mean, to me, this is overall like a pretty big surprise because ByteDance has been so unassailable for so long. I mean, TikTok, the ascendant social channel, everyone knows about it. Literally, they defeat the US government's ability to regulate it, like basically seemed invincible. But they've had aspirations for gaming for quite some time. And just to put that in some context, they've invested really aggressively over the previous several years. They bought Moonton Tech for $4 billion in 2021, reportedly beating Tencent, which is the largest game company in the world, with that bid, presumably having to pay significant costs against that. They also acquired C4 Games in April 2021 for an undisclosed amount. They were working heavily in development on an unannounced game. And they're also publishing Marvel Snap, which, while hailed as a critical success, and also I have given them hundreds of my own dollars, they were purportedly struggling commercially, although there's not some public information about that. So, I mean, I think at a high level, I see this as a sort of a continued retrenchment across the mobile games industry. And if you listen to some of our earlier episodes, there were lots of games companies that were struggling. And this seems to just be a sort of similar effect that's at play here. But I'm curious, Warren, what do you think about this overall? Do you have any insight?
Yeah, and this is a tricky one because we've done some work with the Nuverse team. We have friends on the Nuverse team, on the Marvel Snap team, and people are still kind of getting to the truth of what's actually going on here. But just going off of what has been disclosed in these articles and the information from Reuters and what's publicly available, I mean, TikTok went hard into game publishing. They made, I believe, for Moonton, that was an acquisition of about $4 billion. I've seen slightly different numbers of different sources. And for those not familiar, Moonton, amongst other games, is the developers of a huge game in Asia called Mobile Legends Bang Bang. And similarly, with the investment and relationship with Second Dinner, they wanted to come out at the gates with AAA developers in both the Asian market and the Western market. And that's not cheap. For Moonton, and specifically the reports are that they outbid Tencent on the acquisition of that studio. And it is not cheap to outbid Tencent. And it's not easy.
No less.
Yeah, it is not easy to go head to head with Tencent. So the aspirations of launching this arm, I think, were about as grand as you can be with launching a new game publishing entity in the, what decade are we in right now? 2020s?
Yeah, I think so. Last time I checked.
Where there hasn't been a lot of like, actually, the last couple of years, huge shots on goal of new mega publishers in mobile.
Sound the obvious exception, but yeah, agreed.
Right, where arguably they're at this point more of an investment arm than a full-on publisher on their own so far. Although a lot of rumors in that space that I think we'll get into in the future. So anyway, yeah, what's the take on this? This is a case where it's not like they had bad products. It's not like they had lack of resources. It's not like they had bad people and a bad team. It almost seems like they overextended. And I'm guessing that the expectations internally at ByteDance for the level of investment that they did in game publishing probably just weren't matched in some capacity. And those, with the level of investment they made, like the expectations of returns must have been sky high. We don't know what those internal numbers look like.
Right. So they were in 2021. The timing also of this is just really bad. They're buying in 2021, market was way up. It wasn't clear the impact of ATT yet at that point for everyone and how much it was going to affect the games industry. So you're having a bidding war at the top of the market. And then you have a bunch of factors compounding that are a headwind in the other direction, which is interest rates increase, ATT, overall mobile becoming less competitive. And I can understand how that can create, if you've invested billions and billions of dollars, there's a really high expectation there. And especially when you're comped against TikTok, which is like the most ridiculously growing business of the modern era. And so it's like, okay, do we spend our effort on TikTok, which is clearly just printing money at the rate that no one came up with, or do we spend money here? So I don't have a ton of insight, but...
Well, I think, we've seen a theme, if you compare 2021 to right now, we saw this with Facebook as well, of like a lot of businesses are just refocusing on their core right now. And I think it's the same story here ultimately with ByteDance. It's really hard to do multiple disparate things and be the segment leader in all of them. And I think ByteDance knows where they're the segment leader. TikTok is just unmatched, I think, still as a social platform. And it probably just made financial sense at the end of the day. But it's sad to see because there's so much. I mean, they have some great games. Like Snap is a great game. I don't play Mobile Legends Bang Bang, but it's a phenomenon and it's a beloved game. They acquired some amazing talent for Newverse. So I'm just watching this one closely, going to see where the dust lands, what happens with these games, what happens with the talent. But yeah, I think this just came down to the economic conditions that the world is in, and companies need to refocus on their core.
Yeah, and I mean, one important note is they're planning to, it seems like based on reporting, their current plan is to divest their current investments in these games. So not shut them down, basically find other homes for them, which is an easy way for them to generate revenue and also cut cost center. So it makes sense.
For a little clarity there, I think there's been, again, this is all like leaked and insider information. Supposedly there has been a clear decision to stop investment in new games and to cancel more new projects. What is more unclear so far is what happens with their current flagpole games. And so I think that's what we're all kind of waiting to see.
Cool. That's what's happening with Newverse. We had a fourth topic, which we were going to cover today.
The biggest story of last week was just the final chapter for now in the Sam Altman OpenAI drama and back and forth. And we talked about it. And we actually don't think that there's a really important relevance angle here for game marketers. So it's almost like discussing like why we're not talking about it. But I think that there's a really interesting related story that popped up in social media last week too, which was kind of the big debut of Pika, which is, they call it like an idea to video platform with a really amazing tech demo that seems to have a lot of people that I respect really excited. So rather than kind of like do a surface level review and reporting on the news, I think what we're going to try to do next week, if all goes as planned, is bring in some of our creative team who's been testing a lot of AI tools over the last year and just kind of get a lay of the land of what they think of Pika, as well as the current landscape of AI for marketing creative, which is an always evolving and often overhyped segment. And I think that's going to be a lot more interesting and relevant to marketers.
Yep. Cool. So stay tuned for that next week. We will have that for you. Maureen, do you want to take us out?
That's it. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the news show this week. As always, this was brought to you by our busy team here at Upptic. At Upptic, when we're not podcasting, which is most of the time, we're not podcasting. We are in the trenches doing all the work to help games grow. So we run large-scale performance marketing across all media channels. We build our own software for prediction, for iOS modeling, for all those users that now ask to not be tracked. Some of the things we don't talk about that we have also built are some ASO tools, really awesome DAM or digital asset manager for creative asset management. We just build a bunch of stuff that we need as marketers, and our company DNA is like we build the products we need. It lets us do our job better. And then as we refine them, we also bring them to market as reasonably cost software products for smaller teams to use. So I like what we do here. I think it's pretty cool. If you're building a game and looking for like cost-efficient, smart ways to grow that game, we would love to meet you if we can help in any way. A lot of times it's just pointing teams in the right direction. But of course, if some of the work we do can be helpful to you, we are here for that. So you can reach us via our website. It's upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Talk soon.